Today we are going to graph quadratic functions. This book says that this is standard form for quadratic functions, but if you've been through Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, this is not standard form. This is clearly vertex form. So if you would like to write next to this vertex form, it's called vertex form because it easily shows us the vertex. The vertex, as it says down here, is HK. Notice in the formula it says minus H, but then positive H is the vertex, plus K, it still has positive K. So this one is always the opposite of the number that you see right here. This version is what most math classes call standard version, standard form. Standard form shows you A, B, and C just like when we were plugging things into the quadratic formula. So everything that we learned in the last unit about the quadratic formula, A is still the number in front of x squared, B is still the number in front of x, and C is the number on its own. In both of these forms, the A value in the front, if A is positive, the parabola opens upward, so it looks like a U. If A is negative, the parabola opens down, so it's a hill shape. So in example 1, they want us to find the vertex, find the y-intercept, and then graph the parabola. On your assignment today, regardless of what the directions tell you, I want you to do exactly what it says here in example 1. Find the vertex, find the y-intercept, and graph it. This one is in vertex form, so we can pick out the vertex really easily. Anyone want to give it a try?
Oh. No.
-3, -2. -3, -2. So the opposite of the number in the parentheses is the first part of your vertex, and that exact number that comes after, that is the y value of your vertex. So we can plot the point, -3, -2. There's our happy little vertex.
Wait, how do you know it's -3?
It's always opposite. The actual formula says y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. And from that formula, the vertex is hk. So see how minus h and h, see how those are opposites? So inside the parentheses, it's like crazy town. It's backwards, it's opposite. Outside of the parentheses, it's normal. So whatever number is inside the parentheses, take the opposite. Outside of the parentheses, use that number. We've got our vertex. Parabolas are symmetric, so we can draw in a symmetry line going through that vertex. You can use a dashed line because it's not really part of the graph. It's just kind of a reference line for our benefit. The y-intercept is a point on the y-axis. Yeah. Every single point on the y-axis has an x value of 0. So the y-intercept is 0, something. To figure out what that something is, we have an x value of 0, plug 0 into the function. So to get this number, plug in 0. So you can hopefully do some of this in your head, or if you want to grab your calculator and type parentheses 0 plus 3, closure parentheses squared, minus 2, you could. 0 plus 3 is 3. 3 squared is 9. 9 minus 2 is 7. So our y-intercept is at 0, 7, which is right at the top of this graph. Because the parabola is symmetrical, which is the correct version of that? Symmetric or symmetrical?
Symmetrical.
Symmetrical. 1, 2, 3. We're 3 units away from that symmetry line, so go 3 units in the other direction. And you can reflect your y-intercept to the other side of the parabola. And then we can draw in our parabola shape. Ta-da! When you're drawing in the parabola, it is important to try to make it a U shape. Try to make sure it doesn't look like that, or like it should not be a V, it should definitely be a U. So round it at the vertex so that it's not a pointy little V. It's especially important that you not make it look like that, because that would just be like really wrong. Yeah, we're not like making fancy little bird, like this is not a sunset scene. Okay, example 2. I want you to try this one on your own. Find the vertex. Even if you struggle finding the vertex, I want you to go ahead and see if you can find the y-intercept. Once you've given it a fair shot, then start the video again. Yes, that means you need to pause the video, and then we can talk about it. Our vertex. You always take the opposite of the number in the parentheses. So positive 2, what number is over here? A 0. There's a plus 0 there. So our vertex is at 2, 0. That's that point right there. And there's a symmetry line going through that point. The y-intercept is always 0, comma something. Plug that 0 in. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. And then reflect that point over. Now we can draw in our parabola shape. This one, it says write the quadratic function in standard form. They want you to complete the square and get this back to what we know as vertex form. Guess what? We're not going to do that because there's an easier way with less work to do this. We still need to find the vertex. We still need to find the y-intercept. We know the y-intercept is 0, comma something. You know what? Let's go ahead and find the y-intercept first because I think that might be fun. If we plug 0 in, 0 squared is 0. Negative 4 times 0 is 0.
7.
When the quadratic function is written in this form, it takes a little bit more work to find your vertex, but it takes a lot less work to find your y-intercept. So we automatically know that 7 is our y-intercept. You don't have to do any math. You just look at the number that doesn't have an x. That's your y-intercept. To find the vertex, this number is going to be the opposite of b over 2a. Does that formula sound familiar to you at all? X equals the opposite of b over 2a. I'm sure you've heard that at some point because in Algebra 2, you learned it. If you look at the quadratic formula, you might notice opposite of b is the first part and 2a is the bottom part. So you can see that axis of symmetry formula. This is actually the formula for the axis of symmetry. So b is the number in front of x. In our case, b is negative 4, but we need to use positive 4. Divided by 2 times our a value, which is 1. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. Once we find that the first part of the vertex is 2, to find the rest of it, we need to plug that number in. So we need to do 2 squared minus 4 times 2 plus 7. And you can do this in your calculator if you want. My only suggestion is when you're squaring something, you should really put it in parentheses because in case it's negative, you want your calculator to do that correctly. So in your calculator, do 2 squared minus 4 times 2 plus 7. I'm going to do this by hand. Oh my gosh.
7.
Did you get 3?
And a 9.
So my vertex is 2, 3. We found the first part by doing opposite of b over 2a, and then plug that number in to get the rest of your vertex. Let's put this on the graph. 2, 3. That's where our symmetry line is. Our y-intercept is at 0, 7. Reflect that point over. And there's our lovely parabola. 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 If I catch you saying parabola, you're going to like owe me lines during Wildcat Hour or something.
You know how many lines I walked in elementary or something?
All right, I would like you to try example 4 on your own. Sorry for all the extra background noise. My 4th hour class today is, you know, there's something. So you are going to find your vertex. You are going to find your y-intercept. And you are going to graph it. Have fun. Pause the video. Pause it. I tried to put as much helpful information on this slide as possible, so if you need to pause this and like just copy all of this down, that'd be great. Your first step is to do x equals opposite of b over 2a. So I did -6 divided by 2 times -1. It is important to do all of that bottom part before you do the division. It doesn't really matter on this one, but sometimes it does. So make sure that you do 2 times whatever and get that number on the bottom, and then do -6 divided by that. I ended up with 3. So that's where that 3 comes from. I plugged 3 in. Now this particular problem is a little weird because it's a negative in front of the x squared. I always put my parentheses directly around the x's. So negative parentheses 3 closure parentheses squared plus 6 times 3 minus 10. I ended up getting -1. So my vertex is at 3, -1. And that's where my symmetry line is. Our y-intercept is always your c value, -10. And the first part of the y-intercept is always 0. And for those of you at home, I cannot get this at the bottom of the screen because of just the way the recording works. So it's all the way down at the bottom of your graph on the y-axis, and then all the way down on the bottom of your graph right over here. And then you would connect to make your parabola. For your assignment, I want you to do numbers 4, 6, 8, 11 through 12, 18, and 22. And completely disregard the directions in your book. I want you to follow these directions right here. Find your vertex, find your y-intercept, and graph. I do have graph paper available for you for this assignment.